Welcome to this week's edition of the Pete Mezzetti Show. I'm Pete Mezzetti. My guest this evening is Joe DeLong, who's the Executive Director of the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities.
Pete, good
Hi,
to
buddy.
be back.
How are you? Good
I'm
to
good.
see you.
I'm good. Got my chair back.
I know you do. So there's a lot new, and we're going to cover it all tonight.
We are. I'm excited.
I know.
Exciting conversation.
I know. Well, let's start talking about it. I guess CCM came out with a report not long ago, and I was wondering if we can talk about it.
Yeah. Listen, I would love to. So as you know, we've talked about on here before. A little over a year ago, Dalio Education released a report about the crisis that we have in Connecticut of at-risk or disconnected young people to the tune of 119,000.
Okay.
So in response to that, the CCM Board of Directors put together a commission called the 119K Commission, named after those 119,000 at-risk and disconnected youth, and really began a year-long process of studying this population and what we could do in Connecticut to effectively address this crisis. And as a result of that work, as you said just a couple weeks ago, that commission released this report titled Young People First, and it has 22 very robust, aligned actions that really provide a roadmap for the residents of Connecticut, policymakers of Connecticut, how to effectively address this crisis that we currently have.
Okay.
So, here to talk about that.
Well, how many people were on the commission?
The commission was made up predominantly of municipal CEOs.
All right.
So mayors and first selectmen from towns and cities all across the state. We had representatives of our larger urban communities. We had suburban representation and rural representation.
Okay.
The commission was completely either bipartisan or nonpartisan, depending upon how you want to look at it. It was made up of Democrats and Republicans and independents. And then there were 3 members of the commission that were not municipal CEOs. One of those members was myself as the CEO of CCM. Andrew Ferguson, who is the co-CEO of Dalio Education, so the person who actually did the study to identify this population. And then a gentleman by the name of Josh Brown. And Josh Brown was our real-life lived experience person. Josh had spent 15 years of his life homeless. He was one of these disconnected young people at one time. He's gone on to be incredibly successful in his life, and now he spends a whole lot of time working with this population, trying to get them on the path that he ultimately got on after going through a series of challenges. So that was the composition of the commission.
Okay. And I saw when they had the news conference when the report came out, there were a whole lot of people that were there.
Oh, you didn't see them all on camera.
Oh, no?
In my time doing municipal work, doing government work, I have never seen a more diverse group of people come forward and support a work product.
Okay.
At the release of this report, we had very robust statements of support come out from the business community, CBIA, the Connecticut Business and Industry Association. Right. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we had the labor unions, and particularly the teachers union, that came out with strong statements of support. The superintendents of schools have come out with strong statements of support. We've had several nonprofits come out with strong statements of support. The United Way has come out and supported this. A group called the State School Finance Project that works on school financing has come out and supported it. So we have really we were blessed with a very robust coalition that came out after this work product that was released and said, this is the right thing to do for Connecticut, and we back doing it, and we have to find a way of putting these things in action together.
Now that the report has been released and everything is done, what's the next step?
Well, there's what we're doing here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of education to explain to people not just what's in it, but really to go back and explain the why this is important, And so I guess maybe we can begin there.
You want to begin with why?
Yeah, let's
and then
begin.
We'll get to what?
Yeah, we'll get to what after why. But
Okay,
I
sure.
think the why is so important because people don't, they sometimes grasp the why of this being we all care about these kids and we need to do more for them, and it's a social issue,
Right.
which is true. But if your morals don't compel you to act, this is a massive economic issue for the state.
Oh, wow.
We spend annually in the state budget, either spend and or lose, a combination of both, about $750 million a year
Okay.
because of this population. That's a staggering number when you think about it. $750 million a year budget hit that we currently have year after year after year into perpetuity. And I always explain to people on the simplest terms, it's a whole lot cheaper to educate somebody and employ them than it is to incarcerate them.
Right, exactly.
You know, so if we can figure out the right way to do it and get people on the right path, there's a huge financial benefit.
Right.
But also just in terms of the state's GDP growth, the estimates are that this level of disconnection is costing the state about $5.5 billion a year in lost GDP. So it is a really massive economic issue for Connecticut. There is a significant amount of opportunity
Okay.
to address what we're seeing right now, which is pretty significant lost opportunity. So that's the big part of the why. Now, if you meet these young people and what they go through, and you understand who they are,
Right.
there's a real moral, emotional, compelling reason to the why as well. I think sometimes people have the idea of, you know, or a fixed set in their mind of how these young people got this way. You know,
Right.
I hear a lot of times, oh, it's all about fatherless families. That's a problem, and you have to break that cycle, but that's not the only problem.
Right.
We have a lot of these young people we've met, it's been medical issues with their parents. You know, parents who have lost jobs because of having multiple strokes and things of that nature that have caused them to fall off. A lot of times it's abuse. Whether it's, we've talked to people who are victims of sexual assault or other types of abuse, emotional abuse, things of that nature. There are a variety of things that young people go through. One of the things that I found really compelling to me was, you know, the name of the report is Young People First. One of the original, when we started this work, one of the original comments that we used to make was developing a report that was titled, Meet Me Where I Dream.
Okay.
You know, always talk about meeting people where they are. This was
Right.
about meeting a young person where they dream so we could create a path for them to get there. How do you achieve those dreams? Well, what was so compelling when we went out and met with these young people across the state, we met with about 280 one-on-one total that met this demographic.
Okay.
So many of them didn't have any dreams at all because they didn't dare to dream. They were just trying to get through the obstacle course that is their life
Right.
to make it to bed at night. Really just survival. They were in, you know, fight or flight mode, a lot of them. And I always say they weren't even trying to get to bed at night. Sometimes they were just getting to put their head down on a sidewalk at night or something else. A lot of them didn't even have a bed to sleep in.
Right.
But what was really compelling was this idea that we really can't name this Meet Me Where I Dream until we give these young people the opportunity to dream again.
Right.
And so many of them don't. So that's a lot of the why. Like I said, if you're not compelled morally or socially to deal with it, you should be compelled economically to deal with it because it's a massive hit to Connecticut.
Okay.
So the what?
Yes.
Right?
What?
What do we do? How do we address it? Well, first off, I think you should point out that the commission had to have somewhat of a North Star type of goal.
Okay.
You have to know like where you're going. I always say you can get in your car and drive in circles. You need to have a map or an idea of what your destination is.
Right.
And so the commission put together a very bold plan of reducing that population in half over the next decade.
Okay.
Which otherwise, you know, means putting about 60,000 young people who otherwise would not be back into the workforce, back into being on course to graduate on time, back on course to being positive outputs within society as opposed to outputs within society that are in a more undesirable type of way.
Right.
And so that's sort of was the North Star goal that every decision that the commission made along the way was figuring out how do you get there? How do you put 60,000 of these young people, how do you reduce this number by half over the next decade? And again, they came up with a series of 22 aligned actions. Some of those 22 aligned actions have multiple subsets within them. But the report, in the simplest terms, I like to break it down, really goes into 3 categories. The first one we'll talk about here in a minute, which is filling in the gaps and getting people the supports they need to be successful.
Sure.
The next part of it is education accountability. How do we put more accountability into our education system? And part of that will include a funding conversation that we can have at some point here.
Sure.
And then the last part of it is workforce development. How do we transition these people into, or these young folks into careers that not only will set them up for success,
Right.
but in many ways will also break perpetual cycles that
Okay.
we see. And so that's really the path, I think, that the commission took in many ways. And, you know, it's complex and it's wonkish, but when you really break it down, it's very reasonable. And there's a lot of common sense to it, I think, as well. So the first part,
Yes.
you know, the first section of the report, we have a lot of nonprofits, social services groups, and others, sometimes clergy groups, that are trying to do good things in this space. And by the way, with taxpayer dollars, we're funding a lot of them to do that as well. But it's very fragmented. And when you think of a young person, you have to really, and this is not just me or the commission, every expert will tell you this, you have to think of their needs like a hub and spoke model of a wheel.
Sure.
The hub is putting the young person at the center, and the spokes are meeting all of their needs. What we do a lot of times in Connecticut is we fund really good, well-meaningful programs that are a really good spoke. You know, so you have the young person at the center, and the spoke on that wheel is a program that's a really good program that could really help them. But the problem is, if they don't receive the other spokes that they need,
Right.
the tire still goes flat.
Exactly.
You know, and so a lot of this report talks about how to take all of the good things that we are already doing and build them into one statewide network of supports that then puts a young person at the center, and it makes sure that there are no gaps, that every one of those spokes are fulfilled. Because if they have 5 needs and you meet 4 of them, you might as well have not even spent the money to meet 4 of them, because they're still going to fall off due to the 5th.
Right.
And so this idea of building out that robust network so a young person doesn't fall through the cracks. Now, a couple of things there about falling through the cracks that currently happens. Number one, as you know, we're hyper-localized.
Right.
So there are some cities and some towns that do this very well. But the moment that a young person crosses the border, their case management's lost. You know, if it's all done just locally within a town. So that's one thing. We have to build this system that is tracked regionally and then is also tracked at a statewide level. So when a young person moves, if they go from one city or town to another, that the support systems that they need move with them, or new ones take their place, so we don't lose them.
Right.
That's one area. The other area that happens quite a bit is a young person can transition or age out through certain parts of the system. So if I'm under the age of 18 and my needs are being met and I am on track in a positive way, and then the moment that I turn 18, the support systems that are supporting me don't support adults,
Right.
now all of a sudden I fall off. And again, all of that work, all of that taxpayer money that was spent, all of that investment can then be lost because this person fell into those cracks, fell into those gaps. So the first part of this report really builds a whole lot of that data tracking, it builds a whole lot of that network, and it makes sure that the cracks are filled in, that the gaps are closed. Now that's the system itself. The other part of it that's really important is, how do you get into the system to begin with? So you build this very robust system,
Right.
where there's no gaps and there's no cracks, but how does a young person access it? Well, right now, one of the ways, you know, there's different ways, but there's not a real good coordinated system, you know. But one of the ways, clear back in the mid-1970s,
Okay.
which is remarkable when you think about it,
Yeah,
it's
right.
been this long. Clear back in the mid-1970s, the state of Connecticut entered into a partnership with United Way to build out the 211 system
Yes.
for help and supports.
Sure.
United Way has done great work when it comes to that, but that system has not been funded or not been allowed to evolve since then. So what happens, a couple things. One, if you do pick up the phone and call, you might actually get through, but if you don't know the right terminology to get supports, you might not be able to get them anyway.
Right.
Now, what does that mean? I'm sleeping on I don't have a home, but I'm sleeping on my friend's couch. My friend's mom says, tomorrow you've got to go. I've let you stay here for 2 weeks, can't stay here forever.
Right.
Tomorrow you have to leave. I call 211 and I say, listen, I've been sleeping on my friend's couch. I don't have a home. Tomorrow I have to leave. Where can I go? Where can I get some supports? Is there a shelter that can take me? What's available? The answer you're going to get is you need to call back when you're homeless. You're sleeping on your friend's couch. You're not homeless. We can't help you. That's the first answer you're going to get.
Oh, good.
That's if you even get through. Your call might get dropped.
Right.
Or if you get through and you know the right terminology, then you might get put on a waiting list somewhere because there's not capacity.
Right.
There's those gaps. That's the challenge with the system as it exists now. But on the front end of that system, here, think about the irony of this. I always kind of laugh when I tell this. When 211 was created as a number to call,
Right.
people either had a landline phone or maybe a pay phone. Now every young person in the world and all of us, we're all walking around with cell phones in our hands.
Right.
But nobody uses them to call anymore.
Of course not.
These young people use them to text, they
Yeah.
use them to snap, they use them to... And so when we were meeting with young people and we said, if we build out this network, how do we get you to access it more robustly? How do we get you into the system quicker? And one of the things that we found was that if we would build an app, which young people are all know all
Yes.
about these apps, if we would build an app for their lives, I'm not even talking about just 211, I mean
Right.
for their lives. Maybe it says what's going on this weekend in the community. Maybe it has gaming in it that they
Right.
enjoy, stuff that attracts young people to become a part of their daily lives. And we build the 211 system into the backbone of that app for supports. So now something every day that I use in my hand, and I may not need supports, and all of a sudden something bad happens in my life,
Right.
and I need support now. I know where to get it because it's right there and something that I've been using every day that's part of my daily life anyway.
Exactly.
And so at that point, you access those services through that app that are right there at your fingertips. We build out that network so there are no gaps and there are no cracks, and that young person can get the support at their fingertips and then be taken into that system of supports where we can build the hub and spoke model around them and track them for their success. So that really encompasses a whole lot of how the first part of this report is built. The other part of that is when we talk about the system, that system and that system that you access through the app doesn't just have to be support services like housing or food or mental illness issues. It could be workforce. I'm getting ready to graduate and I don't know where I'm going for a job, and I have this app. This app I can go and access and say, where do I find employment? What's out there?
Right.
What employment programs can help me? So they can access that.
Right.
And the other part of it is, the last part of it is in this whole data network, is making sure that our schools are pulled into it. So our schools are collecting data, and data is following a young person through the system. That data is following a young person if they change schools. So when a teacher gets a new student in, they don't just see their transcripts. They don't just see how many days they've been absent or what their disciplinary record is. They see more holistically what the needs of that young person were that were being met,
Right.
where they came from. So again, keeping them from falling through the cracks and filling in those gaps. So the whole first, basically 3 aligned actions in this report are all about filling in those cracks, getting people access into the system of supports. And here's the brilliant part of it all.
Boy.
Here's the really brilliant part of it all if you're a taxpayer. We fund money and we funnel it down through those who are participating in that network. And we stop using taxpayer money to fund people who just want to go it alone. I want to start a nonprofit that just focuses on this. I just want to be a singular spoke, but I don't want to work with anybody else. That's fine. You go do that. Do great things. Don't do it with taxpayer money. Exactly. Let's put our efforts, and what that does for all of these non-for-profits and these social services and all that, it keeps them from going and spending their capacity, using up their capacity to go to the State House and fight for funding every year.
Right.
They don't have to fight for funding anymore.
No.
We fund the network, and that money is distributed out to support the network and fill in those gaps. And we stop wasting taxpayer money on people who maybe have a good idea but aren't bringing a whole lot of return. So.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's if you want to break this down into pieces, that's like part one.
Well,
yeah.
Let's keep going.
So keep going. Okay. So let's shift over into part two.
All right.
Part two is bringing more accountability into our education system. We weight things. When school systems are held accountable, things are given weights.
Right.
And a lot of times those weights don't make a whole lot of sense.
No.
So we will weight like physical education the same as we will weight the ability to read or write at grade level. Mm-hmm. So you think about that. When you graduate, and I was a former athlete, I'm not now. I probably should be fitter than I am, but I do put a price on fitness. I think it's important.
Right.
But I also think it's probably more important to be able to read and write when you graduate high school than it is to do a push-up.
Okay.
I think you probably are more set for success if you could read or write and have those basic skills than if you can do a push-up or sit-up. So we have to look at how we weight those things. And then we have to look at, we really are in a race to graduation with young people as a school system, as a K through 12 school system. Once they graduate, you know what we do? That's
exactly.
It. We're done. We don't wait at all of them having a post K through 12 plan or a post graduation plan.
Okay.
We should require school systems when they work with young people to have a plan that they've worked through with that young person. And that young person may deviate from that plan. We all deviate. Right. I never thought when I was young this is what I was going to be doing.
No.
But we have to help them know what their next step is after graduation. If it's higher ed, if it's a 4-year university, fine, that's great, but it's not for everybody.
Right.
If it's a trade school, fine, that's great, but it's not for everybody. Some of these young people should be coming up through high school and being prepared for the skills to move right into the workforce because that's what they plan to do.
Right.
And so we have to develop those skills appropriately, and we have to have that plan in place for them so they're not lost when they graduate. For 12 years, somebody's been coming and getting me and trying to get me to school and putting me in a classroom, and now all of a sudden they hand me a diploma and all of those people are out of my life and I have no idea where I go now.
Exactly.
We need to change that. That's very important for these young people to be successful. And so there's a lot of recommendations in there on that accountability piece. The other thing we need to do is we need to look at the stuff that we've been doing for years that doesn't work. We have these alliance districts in Connecticut. They were created, I think, maybe back in 2012. The idea is that if you become an alliance district for these underperforming districts, you should never be one for more than 5 years because there's going to be a plan in place to get you back on track, and we funnel all this money into them and all these supports. Well, only one school that was ever named an alliance district came off the list. Every year we add more.
Right.
Their graduation rates have not improved. Their performance rates have not improved. They're very challenged. They continue to be very challenged. And what they have become, frankly, is an exercise in compliance, where the alliance district has somebody who fills out a bunch of paperwork and forms and it sends it uphill to the Department of Education, and the Department of Education looks at those forms and fills out some more and makes some recommendations and pushes it downhill. And we're spending all of this time and all of this effort pushing paper uphill, downhill, now for well over a decade with no positive results. We have a commissioners network set up for the 25 lowest performing schools and how to spend money and how to get them back on track. Hasn't worked. It hasn't worked. The outcomes of it have not been good. But yet we see outcomes at a national level. We have the data that understand models that do work. Community school type models work. where you're actually bringing the unique services and supports that these young people in alliance districts and in the commissioners network need on a daily basis. And you're providing those to them through the school system in order to keep them actively involved and engaged. Those models work. So what we're saying is these things we've been doing that are low performers, that we're spending taxpayer dollars on it,
Right.
just stop. Just stop. Like, stop throwing good money after bad, and let's start reinvesting. We don't want to take the money out of it necessarily,
No.
but let's start reinvesting that money in a different way that has proven outcomes in other areas, as opposed to continuing to do the things that we've done that have not been effective. So that's a big area of this report as well, in terms of reimagining the way that we invest in these populations in a more productive way.
Would you mind sticking around for another segment?
Be glad to.
All right,
Thank
we'll
you.
be right back.
Finding a reputable business shouldn't require luck or chance. But how can you tell who you can trust? Pro tip: the BBB connects people with businesses they can trust. So think of the BBB as the better check with the BBB first, because better businesses are honest and commit to high ethical standards bureau. That's why they're better. Always look for the sign of a better business and find a better business anytime at bbb.org.
I am a grounds maintainer and a family man.
I'm a police officer and an athlete.
I'm an EMT and an animal lover.
I'm a tow truck driver and a world traveler.
We all have a life outside of work.
And we don't want to lose it.
So when you see our vehicles on the side of the road,
Slow down and move over.
Slow down and move over.
It's the law.
and it can save a life.
Welcome back to this week's edition of the Pete Mezzetti Show. I'm Pete Mezzetti, sitting here with Joe DeLong from the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you, Pete. Yeah.
Thanks, Joe.
We had a good first half of the hour.
I know. Now we got another half hour to fill. So let's continue with the report.
Yeah, I mean, for those who were tuned in, we spent the first half hour talking about the first couple sections of this report.
Right.
That had to do with building out the network of services for young people. That had to do with bringing more accountability into our school systems. The other thing that we didn't touch on the education accountability piece that I think is really important is having more choice in our graduation standards. We have become very rigid. And so what happens is, if you have a young person whose school's not working for them because it just doesn't align with the things that work for them, and we take them out of a regular school and we put them in an alternative school or something like that, well, they're still trying to meet the same graduation standards that are very rigid. We need to have more flexibility for choice to keep people engaged in the things that they're interested in, where they could go on to successful careers in life. And so we're taking a hard look at that. We'll loop back around and we'll come back to the last part on education that's so very important. It's kind of standalone, which is the education funding. But then the report shifts into a series of recommendations about workforce. We have all of these young people who are disconnected from employment, and we have all of these job openings in the state. It just seems crazy, and not all of these job openings are high-skilled jobs. A lot of them are very entry-level type positions. But here's what I found that was so incredibly striking, was that when we went and we met with, there's different levels of disconnection. There's just at-risk kids, there's moderately disconnected, and then there's the very severely disconnected who probably have not graduated, don't have a job, and some of them may be incarcerated or, When we went and met with the young people who had entered the criminal justice system, one thing that we heard over and over again, which I was not expecting, which is strange because, as you know, I used to run a statewide jail and prison system, so I've done this work before.
That's right.
But one of the things that the young people in Connecticut told us, in a very uncoordinated manner, because we're all over the state doing this, was that there was a tipping point where I wanted a job. I wanted to put food on the table. I wanted to put a roof over my head. I wanted opportunity for me or my little brother or my little sister that I was taking care of. And I reached out to a workforce development program and I was turned away. Or there wasn't enough capacity. They were full. They didn't have a spot. And ultimately, that's when I turned to the streets. And once I turned to the streets, there was no turning back. I didn't realize when I made that decision to go do something to put gas in a car or food on the table or a roof over the head, that it would be a downward spiral that I couldn't get out of.
Right.
And so that also indicated, I think, to the commission, this very important need to make sure that we were creating a workforce path for young people. So we want the schools to kind of require, as part of their measurement, where a young person, what the plan is for a young person to go after 12th grade, so we're not just washing our hands of them.
Right.
But we also want to build out on some very good, very robust, and very successful workforce programs that exist in Connecticut that are just massively underfunded. You know, a lot of this is about taking the things that we do and are doing well and just bringing them to a larger capacity. And in doing so, everybody says, well, there's a cost to that. The cost is greater to not do it. That's what people have to understand. The cost of action pales in comparison to the continued cost of inaction. And I think that's one of the things that we're really making sure that we work within communities, within legislators, and within others to look at that from a very real number perspective. You know, if I say to you, Pete, give me $20, you might say, oh, I'll give you $20.
Right.
If I say, Pete, you give me $20 and I'm going to hand you back a 50, I mean, how long do I have to wait for that 50? You've enticed me now. How does this work?
Yeah,
what is
right.
that? And that's really how a lot of this works. But on the workforce side, we can show in very real terms, not only reducing the other cost of the challenges that are created by these young people not being employed,
Right.
but also show the return on that investment in terms of taxpayer dollars into the system of these young people now paying income taxes and sales taxes and all of those other things that they're not engaged in. So that last section of that report really goes deeply into that on the workforce side. Now,
Yes.
the education funding piece. So here's the way this report is developed. As I said, there's 22 aligned actions.
Okay.
21 of them are kind of built in on a funding piece, and how do you pay for them, how do you implement them. 21 of them kind of go together in a system, in a network. But the independent driver of all of it is actually the funding of public education and where we are as a state. There is a narrative out there. This is why this work is so challenging. There is a narrative out there that is not an accurate narrative when it comes to how we fund public education. The first thing, this is all statistically factual. It's not opinion. It's not. The state of Connecticut, in real dollars, in real terms, has reduced its commitment to public education just since 2017 by over $400 million a year. $407 million a year that the state of Connecticut has reduced its proportion of public education spending. Now you'll hear, nobody hears that. All you'll hear is, well, we've made historic investments in public education. We spend more in public education now than we ever have.
Right.
You know, we've increased public education significantly over the last couple of years. All that's true.
Yes.
But it's all lagged inflation. It's not kept up with inflation. So what that means is proportionally, the state's proportional share of public education has gone down. The municipal share, which is the property tax, proportionally has gone up. So as certain state leaders will say, well, we haven't increased taxes. Yes, you have. You just took $407 million of state cost and you shifted over into the property tax.
Right.
So your fingerprints weren't on it.
Exactly.
But that's absolutely a tax increase. And it also makes these problems worse. And the reason why it makes these problems worse is the areas with the highest needs also have the lowest property tax base.
Aha.
So you're disproportionately hitting urban communities. You're disproportionately hitting all of the small rural communities up and down the 395 corridor, where there is a massive amount of poverty and disconnection and not a real strong tax base.
Right.
But as the state reduces its proportional share, you're asking those small rural communities to pick up the slack, which, you know, is not sustainable. They simply cannot do it. And so this report really goes into great detail of pointing that out. When you look at it per student, it's about $400 per student
Right.
just since 2017 that the state has reduced in real terms its share of public ed. Now, we say, well, okay, but we still do a really good job of public education in Connecticut, right? And we're still really committed to it.
Sure.
Proportionately, the state of Connecticut at the state government level now proportionally covers about 36% of public education costs. That puts us in the lowest quarter of states across the country,
Okay.
36%. Most of our surrounding states are anywhere from like 42 to 45%. That is a significant difference. So the state policymakers have made the policy decision to fund education at a much lower rate than what our neighbors do or the rest of the country does, and rely on local property taxes to make up the difference, which then creates these massive inequities within the system and raises everybody's property taxes, which also leads to challenges with home ownership. You know, there's a whole lot of other things that come out of pushing things into the most regressive part of our tax code. The benefit is standing up behind a podium and saying, look at me, I haven't raised taxes. The downside of it is you force tax increases someplace else in the most regressive area. So what the report does is it really talks about that formula, and it does a couple of things. Number one, when the ECS, which is the education cost sharing formula,
Okay.
when it was put into place, the ECS had a foundational cost. You know, you put weights against that foundation for different things, but you have a foundational cost of what the state determined that it costs as the foundation to educate a young person.
Right.
That foundational cost was put into place in 2013. Guess how many times that foundational cost has been increased since 2013?
How many?
0.
Really?
State policy has essentially said that it costs the same amount of money, or will cost the same amount of money in 2025 to educate a young person as it cost in 2013. That's absurd. That's just absurd. So, and then you have these different areas where you have to create a weighting, you know, a weight against that foundation, a weight of, you know, high needs areas, economically disadvantaged, high level of English language learners, high level of special, I'm going to butcher, we're not supposed to say special education anymore. We're supposed, there's another term, but essentially what we used to call like the special education kids. Students with disabilities. I'm sorry, I was really struggling to get that, but that weighting. So what the commission came up with was they came up with a plan that creates a different weighting in all of those areas and raises that foundational base a little bit. Here's the interesting part of that. Where the commission, on the Young People First, where the 119K commission ultimately fell, was a new ECS formula that would increase state spending by $545 million a year. Sounds like a lot of money, doesn't it?
It does.
It does. And it is. I mean, I'm a pretty fiscally conservative guy. It is a lot of money. However, to put it into perspective, if all the state had done was adjust the base for inflation since 2013, the number they determined in 2013 to be the right base, changed none of the weights or anything else. All they did was just adjust the base every year in line with inflation. The state would be paying well over $800 million a year more now.
Really?
If all they did was adjust that base for inflation since 2017, so forget about 2013 up to 17, if all they did was adjust that base for inflation just since 2017, the state would be paying like $607 million more a year now. So that $545 million is not a big number, considering that it doesn't even eat all the way into the underfunding that the state has done by not making inflationary adjustments to a formula that, oh, by the way,
yes,
when they put it in place in 2013, one of the guarantees was that it would adjust for inflation over time.
Really?
And again, it hasn't adjusted for inflation in almost, in over a decade.
Wow.
You know, so that's a very, very critical component of this as well, that we as a state have to start committing to these young people at the same level that other states all across the country do, if we want to eat into this problem. But again, these numbers that I've just thrown at you,
Yeah.
they still don't make up the $750 million a year that we're losing in lost tax revenue and additional costs by allowing these young people to become disconnected and fall off. So it's still, even with the investments that need to be made,
Right.
those investments still bring a positive economic return if they're made.
Wow.
So a lot there.
Yeah.
I think the final thing that the report does,
Yes.
that I won't go into tremendous detail about, but I think is important. It also recognizes there's some other states like Illinois that has this Chicago Crime Lab, and there's some different names for different ones. But it also recognizes the need to create an independent from state government, maybe at Yale, maybe at the Tao Youth Justice Center, maybe through UConn. We need to find a partner. We need to find a philanthropic groups that'll have to get it started. But we need an outside of government kind of quality control group that goes and says, when you put all these things in place, that can come back. We can't have a group like these mayors and first selectmen who did this Young People First report.
No.
They can't do this every year.
No.
But we need that outside quality control group that every single year, that doesn't have a tie to somebody that wants the report to look a certain way, can come back and give us the measurements against all these things and say what's working, what is not working, so we don't have to do like we're doing with the Alliance Districts and the Commissioners Network and wait 14 years to recommend that we pivot.
Right.
We can pivot when we need to pivot in a more robust sort of way. So, a lot of stuff there.
Oh, there's also stuff there. So
A lot of information.
it is. What else do we want to touch on regarding the report? We got some time left.
Well, I think one of the things that we really should touch on about this is the collaborative nature of this work.
All right.
Now, this involves, I think we mentioned at the beginning of the program about all of the various groups that have come out in support of this. It's more than that. It's more than the Business and Industry Association and the teachers unions and the superintendents and others. By the way, the Speaker of the House, Matt Ritter, came out and said, there's a lot of stuff in here I really like. This is great. I appreciate him doing it. We had the minority leader of the House. You're talking about the bipartisan nature of it, who was at a campaign event a couple of weeks ago. And when people asked him, what are the big issues for this upcoming session? He said, well, this disconnected youth is definitely one of them. Like, people are recognizing this is important. But this is one of those issues, as part of that recognition. We have to keep learning from each other, and we have to keep engaging, and we have to keep educating communities. I will tell you, and I've never been a person who's really worried about, the 55-year-old blogger who lives in his mom's basement.
Right.
However, you do see some articles about this come out, and you'll see somebody in a comment section of the newspaper, and they say the most inaccurate, off-the-wall type of things.
Of course.
And I don't necessarily begrudge them for that, as much as I understand our need to continue to educate and get accurate information out to people so they understand it. That we're not talking about all criminals here. We're not talking all about kids that come from fatherless families. That all of these young people have a different story. And we're not talking about young people who aren't trying. Some of them are trying to get through this obstacle of their lives in ways that many of us who are very successful, who come from different backgrounds, would have given up on a long time ago.
Right.
And so I think continuing to share and to highlight their stories. And as adults, to stop doing dumb things. Some of the things that aren't in this report that are so remarkably dumb, and that's not the most eloquent word.
No.
But that's what they are.
Right.
We went to a school system where we met with a large contingent of young people at this high school who we learned in the meeting with them. At first I thought, well, this not right, this can't even be legal. And then I found out that every kid at every table was talking about the same thing, that the high school system started having problems with fights in the bathrooms. So their response to that was they just closed all the bathrooms.
Oh, good.
So we're sitting with, 100 plus young ladies in high school who are saying 1 week out of the month, I can't go to school.
Right.
So what do you mean?
Right.
I have hygiene needs.
Exactly.
1 week out of the month, I can't get in the bathroom. So 1 week out of the month, I don't go to school. I would have never even dreamed doing this work,
No.
that would happen in this day and age, that we're literally having kids who are falling off track and who aren't going to graduate on time,
Right.
because somewhere along the line, some adult genius decided it made their life easier to close bathrooms in the schools
Right.
than to create some type of level of monitoring to make sure fights weren't going on in there.
Exactly.
So, that's an accountability piece too. There's a lot of, the majority of people in our school systems are doing amazing work, or they're really trying to do amazing work. But we can't ignore those stories either, where we're sitting there looking a bunch of young people in the eye who are saying, yeah, I'm doing everything I can. I'm going to after school programs. I'm engaged in my police activity league. I'm trying to stay off the streets. Oh, but 1 week out of the month, I can't go to school because
Right.
I have to have a bathroom.
Exactly.
And so I think those are things we have to continue to do too, is to work and to engage. Your buddy, Brian O'Connor,
Yeah.
our head lobbyist. Brian's
Absolutely.
always wondered if I want to bring him up. Brian O'Connor's got his work cut out for him.
He does.
Brian works under that building. And, a lot of times it's your vote counting. Your vote counting of
Right.
who are my fours, who are my... Nobody's against helping young people. There are no againsts.
No.
But you have to go around and you have to answer people's questions and get them to understand why the recommendations are set the way that they are. It's not just a group of mayors and first selectmen who sat around a table isolated and said, I think this, I think this, I think this. No, they went out and they met with young people directly on the streets. And then they met with experts, subject matter experts within Connecticut. They met with subject matter experts outside of Connecticut. They met with people who are doing this work on a daily basis. They used the Boston Consulting Group, which the state uses all the time when it needs an outside expert to really come in and analyze something. They used the Boston Consulting Group to analyze data in Connecticut, to analyze where we're not keeping up with the rest of the country, to analyze where we're not putting best practices into place. And so the job of somebody like Brian O'Connor is to curate all of that.
Right.
And to work his way through that building and to be an asset to the people who have to make these decisions and get them to understand why, and to not do it in a way that puts them on the defensive. I will tell you that the General Assembly itself, I'm no stranger to being critical of things that they do.
No.
But the General Assembly has worked really hard in this area. They've worked to try to get up education funding. They've worked on the criminal justice and juvenile justice reform. They have shown a great interest in doing this better on both sides of the aisle. And they also helped in the formulation of this report. It wasn't like we did the report and here it is, surprise.
Right.
There were meetings with legislative leaders along the way. But we have to get the administration to move. That's a challenge. The bureaucrats like to do what the bureaucrats do.
Yeah.
And doesn't mean their heart's not in the right place. No. Doesn't mean they don't do good work, but bureaucrats are hard to move. Right. And so I think we have our work cut out for us there as well.
Absolutely.
So.
Now we talked a little bit about CCM in the beginning, and you on your board of directors also, we have a mutual friend on your board. That would be the illustrious first selectman of the town of Old Saybrook.
We have a lot of mutual friends on that board, I'm sure. Carl Fortuna, I know, has been a regular guest on your show.
Absolutely.
And CCM also has a huge part of CCM is we have this insurance risk pool called CIRMA, the Connecticut Interlocal Risk Management Agency.
Right.
So Carl is not only on our board, but he has been the person on our board that's been chosen to be the chair of KERMA. So he's not only participating as a CCM board member, but he's also overseeing what really is a fairly significant, I think about $90 million a year in premium insurance operation.
Really?
Now, Carl is handsomely compensated for that work. He
Right.
gets $0 a year
Okay.
for it. So, it just tells you about his commitment. He does the work that he does in his his community.
Yep.
Serves on the CCM board and then serves as the chairman of the KERMA board.
Right.
And all he gets out of it is a drive to another part of the state on his own dime
Yeah,
every
right.
once in a while and sitting through multiple hours of meetings. But he's remarkable. He really is. I think a friend to everyone who's
Oh, yeah.
who's come across and had to meet with him.
Oh, yeah.
Or work with him.
Now, how long have you been with CCM?
I started, it's always funny to say this, I started on April Fool's Day, kind of tells you something,
Yeah, exactly.
of 2015. So I am coming up this next April, I will have completed a decade.
Wow.
With CCM. So time flies.
It does.
And I've seen a lot in that time. I've seen a lot of good people come and go.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a couple knuckleheads come and go,
Exactly.
along the way, but it's been a great ride.
Now, if people want to go to the website, can they find the report on
Yes.
the website?
Yes. So if you go to our website,
Yeah.
which is ccm-ct.org,
Okay.
you can find the Young People First report. You can also find a media page in there that lists the series of organizations that have come out with positive statements of support for this, as well as the multitude of media stories. And when this is up by link,
Yes.
it will be on there as well.
It will.
Yes, sir. We will include it on
You're
there.
gonna put that up?
Well, of course we would. Why wouldn't we?
Excellent.
I might put it right at the top, Pete.
There you go.
So
Wow. Well, all right. Now, as far what are we got some time, a little bit of time left. Tell us what else CCM does for their towns that they cover. Everything.
anything they need.
Yep.
I mean, anything they need. Earlier this year, we released a big flooding study report on how to mitigate flooding, which is becoming a massive issue in the state and something that people have had a real hard time getting their arms around. That was, interestingly enough, a work product that took almost 2 years. And when the first draft of it hit and was ready for release, the day after that is when the historic flooding hit Oxford.
No.
So the report came out right after that, and I think a lot of people looked at it and said, "Oh, they did this, in a response to Oxford." It was actually a two-year product that hit, or the draft, one of the final drafts came down and was ready to go the day before that flooding hit.
Wow.
And it was interesting. We actually intentionally held off. Probably a week longer before releasing it because we didn't want people to think that we were just jumping on a tragedy and trying to put a report out. So we do that. We provide that kind of guidance. We do a lot of education and training. We advocate at the national level as well. We returned a massive amount of additional ARPA funding to Connecticut. And what I mean by additional is cities and towns all across the state received ARPA, all across the country received ARPA funding.
Right.
But because Connecticut doesn't have any county government,
Right.
the county government ARPA funding was not going to come to county structures that don't exist. Right. We lobbied on the Hill in DC, and we made sure that the county allotment came to Connecticut and was divided up amongst the towns and cities. And what ended up happening was many of our smaller communities actually received more money from the county allotment as a result of our advocacy than they even received from the municipal allotment that was part of the regular ARPA plan. So our ARPA dollars for our towns and cities were essentially doubled in Connecticut because of the advocacy that we did on the Hill. So what I always tell our newly elected members is look at your staff and figure out where you don't have capacity. What is it that I wish I had a staff person that could do that, or I wish I had this subject matter expert. look at us as an extension of your staff. So we come in and we fill in the needs where your individual city or town has a certain need but doesn't have the ability to fund that need. That's what we essentially pride ourselves in doing for our members.
Joe DeLong from CCM, we're out of time, but I want to thank you for coming down. Hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Sounds great.
All right.
Appreciate it, Pete.
Thanks, Joe. On behalf of Joe DeLong, I'm Pete Mezzetti. Thanks, good night, and we'll see you next time.